Hello fear seekers, and welcome back to the channel. If you're at all familiar with Native American folklore, you've no doubt heard of skinwalkers, medicine men that, through dark incantations and other worldly bargains, have been given the gift of unnatural long life, the ability to perfectly imitate voices and change their shape at will. Today, we're going to be diving into some disturbing, true skinwalker horror stories. Now, it is a dream of mine to read subscriber horror stories someday. With that in mind, I'd ask that you subscribe to the channel and like the video so we can make that happen together. If you have any scary stories from your own life, feel free to send them to the email in the description. I would be honored to read them. Now, without further ado, sit back, lock your doors and windows, and get ready to ferment your fears. The following experience happened a few years ago. The person I was dating at the time, Native, invited me to go with them to their grandmother's house for Christmas. This being the first time I'd ever been to a Native American reservation, I wasn't sure what to expect. I had a lot of ideas regarding what it might be like, as well as the what-ifs. Nevertheless, I was excited to go somewhere I had never been before. Most of my excitement was reserved towards learning more about the culture and unique opportunity of visiting a reservation as an outsider. Because of this, I was also a bit nervous. What if I wasn't accepted? Would the people be welcoming, or would they be hostile towards my presence? Although these questions were lingering, most of my fears were quelled by the wonderful hospitality I had been shown by both his grandma and the people I had the privilege to interact with whilst visiting. We left our house on Christmas Eve with our dog and started to make the 4-hour journey to Grandma's house. On the way, we saw a beautiful sunset scatter across the mountains. After traveling for about 3 hours, we found ourselves at the turnoff that leads to an hour-long drive on a desolate road that would eventually take us to our destination. While on this road, my significant other shared stories of dances and polytheistic practices their tribe had. All of it fascinated me and left me asking more questions than I had imagined asking in the first place. By the time we arrived to Grandma's house, it was dark and cold out. As I began to unpack the car, my significant other took our dog a bit a ways from the house to go potty. By the time they got back, I had taken our bags inside and locked the car up for the night. As we sat around the kitchen table eating food lovingly cooked by Grandma, we shared stories and played a card game. After about an hour, we all said goodnight to one another and got ready to turn in for bed. 12 a.m.-ish, my significant other and I laid down and I called our dog to the bed. A short time thereafter, we fell asleep, although I forgot to turn off the light next to the bed on the nightstand. Around 2 to 3 a.m., I woke up having to use the restroom and noticed that our dog was sitting just looking at the door that led out to the small hallway. On the other side was the main door to the house. I called for her to come back to bed, and she just put her nose at the base of the bedroom door, sniffing while scratching. Thinking that she too had to use the restroom, I walked up to the main house door and opened it, ushering her to go potty. She ended up just sitting there and staring. After trying to coax her to go outside a few times and failing in my attempts, I closed the door and made my way to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. In the kitchen, there was a big window to the right of the sink that overlooks the driveway to the house, with a bit of light that makes the driveway barely visible at night. As I reach to turn on the faucet, my head turns to the right to look outside, and I see a dog sitting outside and staring into the house. Something was off about this dog, though. It was much larger than a typical large breed by at least 2 times. I began to get the chills and internally said to myself, "Screw this." Grabbing my water and about to head back to bed, the dog got up and began to walk away. One thing that I feel I might not convey well is the way this dog walked. It seemed to walk very awkwardly and almost stiff-like. While eating the breakfast his grandma had made the next morning, I had nonchalantly asked anyone listening at the kitchen table if the neighbors had an extremely large dog. That's when Grandma began to ask questions and my significant other started to look concerned. Grandma immediately made a few phone calls, and after a bit of time passed, a native priest and healer arrived at the house, and they began to converse silently with Grandma. Thinking I must have done something wrong, my significant other joined my grandma in the conversation. They all begin to look at me and talk more, and then the priest goes around the house with sage and cedar. The healer comes to talk with me and Grandma about my experience, and my significant other disappears outside the house to gather raw meat. From what I can gather, I encountered something I should not have the previous night, and by my arrival, an outsider, they had to make certain preparations to ensure our safety for the duration of my stay. After this visit, we visited many other times and I had no other weird experiences, but this experience left me chilled to the bone and will live with me for the rest of my life. I can't get over how this dog behaved, and how large it was. Okay, so I'll start off by mentioning I live in Oregon. Not quite a rural town, but our town is small and only about a 10-minute drive to what you would actually consider a rural town or area. Everyone's heard about the cryptids and lore of the Oregon woods. I hate these woods. They're just vast and terrifying, but at the same time tempting and beckoning almost. I stay out of the woods. I don't hunt or fish, and I might go hiking once every couple of years with friends, but I make it a point to not go where I don't feel safe. I kind of brushed off all the stories about the woods here until I had an experience of my own, and I'm ready to share what I saw that night. My friend and I worked the graveyard shift at a local bakery, and we always carpool. She picks me up at about 11:30 p.m. The bakery itself is in a more rural area, but the main road in town takes us almost all the way out there. It's a well-lit road until you get slightly out of town, and since it's the main road through town, even at night, there's usually passing cars or people walking. From my house, it takes about 10 minutes to get to work using this road. For about 3 months, this road was being repaved. We'd have to stop literally right before the turn into the bakery to wait for the construction crew to finish whatever project they were doing. After 2 nights of being stopped right outside of work for over an hour, and an estimated date of construction being done, being 3 months out, we decided to start taking the back roads to work. The back way to work was on the opposite side of town of this main road. It took us out of town, around the outskirts of town, and finally to the bakery for a total of about 30 minutes travel time instead of 10. This back road was completely surrounded by heavy woods. There was a private drive to a house every 5 miles or so. No streetlights, and no passing cars, no pedestrians. This road was also extremely curvy, just constant twists and turns. As expected, we'd see a lot of deer, and the occasional possum, squirrel, etc. This particular night, we started our journey through the back roads just as we had been all week. We got about 10 miles through when my friend went around this bend and then suddenly slammed on her brakes. I was on my phone, so I wasn't looking up when she saw it first. I look up, and right in front of the car is this gigantic buck. I'm talking huge. Not moose-sized, but definitely one of the largest bucks I'd ever seen. He was staring directly at us through the windshield. We were just kind of frozen for a moment for some reason. We both looked down at the feet of the deer, and in between its front feet was a dead raccoon. It was clearly a raccoon. Its face was pointed towards us, ringlets on the tail, basically a stereotypical raccoon. Except this thing was also huge. Now the buck was large, but large bucks aren't unheard of. This raccoon was the size of a huge dog, like the size of a mastiff. We looked back up at the deer, and it was still staring right at us, like it was making eye contact with us both. My friend flashes her high beams and honks the horn at it, hoping to scare it off. It doesn't run away. Without breaking eye contact with us, it starts to walk toward the car, slowly. We both are freaking out at this point, and my friend throws the car in reverse, backs up, and swerves around the deer. This entire time, it moves its head to keep eye contact as we back up, pull to the side, and drive away. We look back behind us, and this thing is just standing in the road, staring at us as we drive away. We finally went around a curve, and I lost sight of it, but until then, it never stopped staring right at us. We talk about this a lot and how weird it was. I didn't think deer ate meat. I'm not a deer expert, I just assumed they were herbivores. So the standing over that dead raccoon was the most unsettling part, even over the constant eye contact. Luckily, we weren't dumb enough to get out of the car, but I always wonder what would have happened if we did. Since then, I've been more aware of the lore around here. I've heard unsettling noises and screams coming from the woods, but this was the only actual encounter I think I've had. Am I thinking too much into this, or is it a little weird to anyone else? There's so many legends and stories of cryptids around here, and I'm sure you've all read about the messed up stuff that happens at Crater Lake. Just thought this might be an interesting encounter for someone to hear. No one else really believes me, but it's hard to believe something you didn't see with your own eyes. My friend is a Mohawk-raised Seneca Haudenosaunee native. He has received some training in shamanism and has a full kit. His mask, full regalia, the whole deal. One evening, my girlfriend at the time, H, this guy C, and I were at a local conversation area. He felt a presence and expressed an interest in returning at night to hold ceremony. We agreed and returned 2 weeks later. There are wooden stairs set into the ground leading to the top of the lookout area, which at the time was under reconstruction. We arrived at midnight, climbed the stairway, and crested the hilltop. He dressed in his regalia, lit some sage, and began to chant in Mohawk. The vibe changed immediately. I remember scanning the tree line as I looked around the area. On a second pass along the line, one of the taller silhouettes was gone. Had some 10-foot person or entity been standing between me and the trees? Before I could begin to wonder at the missing hump in the dark tree line, C had stopped his chanting. Something is here. I think it's a shaman spirit. He turned and began to chant again. At this point, off down the hill, I heard a screech. The best description I can think of is a garage door in desperate need of an oiling, closing loudly. Then we heard it again. H turned to me with her eyes wide and said, "It's getting closer." The thing proceeded to approach us, somewhere above in the trees in the forest to our right. It was calling in regular intervals as it approached, this loud, "Scree! Scree! Scree!" As we tracked it with our ears, we looked straight at each other in the dark, and then straight up. The regularity of the cry meant the next one should have been directly overhead. There was nothing above us against the starry background, and no further cry was heard. C wrapped up his ceremony. He gathered his things, and we started to leave. He told us he had a vision of a red wolf watching us from the forest. He thought that whatever spirit was there was powerful, and definitely not benevolent. I made the stairs before C and H, and proceeded down them. A few steps in, and the flashlight showed a black mass on the stairs that most definitely hadn't been there when we came up. A crow wing. Not a feather, or parts like an animal had been at it. The whole damn wing. I remember toying the edge to make sure that what I was seeing was legit. C came up behind me. "Please tell me you didn't touch it." When I told him I had used my shoe to nudge it a little, he immediately got out his sage and washed the smoke all around me in a full-body smudge, chanting in Mohawk as he did so. Then we went back to the car and back to town. We commented that it still felt as weird in the car as it had on the hilltop. We dropped C off at his house, then my girlfriend H and I went home. I get home and I go to bed. H says she is going to read in the living room for a bit. I kiss her goodnight and go to bed. Sometime later, I'm awakened by a quiet knock on the door. I say, "Come in." It's my friend C. He looked scared. H said I could come in to see you. Are you okay? He told me then that it followed us home. What? What do you mean, C? He described how he had gone to bed shortly after we dropped him off, fell asleep, and was awoken suddenly because he couldn't breathe. There was a pressure on his chest, like someone or something was sitting on him, trying to suffocate him. As he strained for breath, just as he was worried about losing consciousness, the pressure would lift. He'd get 1 or 2 deep sucking breaths in, and then the weight would return. He finally decided to come see if I was okay, and if maybe we could fight back together if I wasn't. I told him I'd been sleeping just fine, but if he wanted to stay, he was more than welcome. He said H had already agreed that was a good idea, and that she would sleep on the couch. C laid down beside me. Almost as soon as he did, I felt it. My chest was constricted by an unseen weight, and I couldn't take in air. C grabbed my hand, and I noticed he wasn't able to draw in either. And over the next long while, the same thing he described as happening to him at his place happened to both of us at mine. Pressure and gasping, and just when our lungs started burning with need, whoosh! Pressure gone, 1 deep breath, maybe 2, and slam! That unnatural weight on our chests again. Over and over and over. Eventually, the assault either ended, or I/we passed out. I remember waking up at some point much later, feeling someone beside me, remembering C, and being surprised when I saw H laying there. I remember saying, "Oh, it's you," and hearing a questioning mumble from her before sleep overtook me again. The first thing next morning, H asked me what I meant by, "Oh, it's you," comment in the wee hours. I explained I was surprised that C had left. "C?" she says, looking at me like I'm crazy. "Yeah, when did he leave?" He hadn't come over. I was insistent he had. I know the difference between reality and dreamland, but no. Apparently I had a very vivid but totally normal nightmare. Nothing to worry about. Chalk it up as the strangest dream experience I'd ever had, and we go on with our lives. 2 days later, H comes running into the apartment after work. She was a barista at a very cool indie coffee shop downtown that C and I both frequented. She explained that C had been in, and I was to go to his place immediately. Huh? Why, H? Is everything alright? She looked uncomfortable. Not exactly scared, but not okay. She refused to give me details, and to this day I'm so grateful she didn't. She just explained she had sent him home and told him to wait there for me. I get in the car and head to C's. Knock on the front door. His mom lets me in. I head to his room in the back. Knock and enter. "Hey Ven, how are you doing?" he asks. I tell him I'm fine. "I just wondered if everything was okay. You were gone when I woke up the other day." Immediately a tingle went through my whole body and a chill iced my spine. "Excuse me?" "Yeah, you came over the other night after you dropped me off, because something had followed us home and was suffocating you as you slept. When you laid down with me, it started hitting both of us." It still gives me chills to this day. C had come into the coffee shop that afternoon and asked H if I was doing okay after leaving his place. She expressed some interested confusion. He told her his story, and without saying a single word about me or my experience, she told C very calmly that she was done work at 5 and would very much appreciate it if he could be home around then, because she was sending me there as soon as she got home. He was startled, but agreed to do so. The reason I appreciate this is she didn't ruin the wonder of it by revealing the truth to either of us. She let us discover it from each other. Something did indeed come home with us and apparently disguised itself as a close friend to conduct its paranormal torment. It came to C disguised as me, and came to me looking like him. While on vacation in Arizona in 2013, I was visiting family who live on the edge of the Navajo Nation. The town they live in is basically on the border of the reservations and such things. The family in question is my mother's brother and sister. They live together with their spouses in a modest home, but the home is unimportant. I went there during my childhood every now and then, and had several Navajo friends, so after a night out catching up with my two old friends, whose names I will not mention because of the events that took place that night, I was driving the two of them home. The female friend, we will call her Sue, was fast asleep in the right side of the back seat, while the male friend, whom shall be called Jim, was wide awake in the left side of the back seat. As we're on the way to Jim's house, I see something on the side of the road that is briefly illuminated by my headlights. It looks like a large coyote walking down the side of the road on all fours. Jim saw it first and pointed it out to me, so I slowed down and turned my brights on. What we both saw disturbed us so deeply that we had to wake Sue up to see if she would confirm that we were not crazy. When Sue woke up and looked out the window, I had stopped the car at this point. She froze in her place, and the thing, which had been walking along at a leisurely pace until now, turned around and stood up on its hind legs. It did not look like a dog does when it stands on its legs. It looked like it was used to doing it. Before Sue could shake herself out of the soul-crushing fear she was in, Jim and I got a good look at it. It was everything the stereotypical definition of a werewolf was, with a few key differences. We saw its snout was less like a wolf's and more like a hybrid between a wolf and a human. Rounded with a dog's nose slightly protruding out and sharp teeth, and its hands and feet both had claws on them which were seemingly permanently extended. That, or it was extremely hostile at the moment it saw us, or rather, her. By the time we were done gawking at the thing and fear started to take over curiosity, Sue snapped out of her own fear long enough to scream at me to drive as fast as I could. She refused to stop screaming until it was completely out of sight, and when we pulled over and she calmed down enough to regain coherency, we asked her what was going on. She explained that she could not tell us why, but she knew what that thing was and that it wanted nothing but to hurt her and anyone related to her. When I dropped her off at her house, I, and Jim as well, felt obligated to walk her to her door. We asked if she was going to be okay, and she said she would tell her dad he was back, and he would protect her, like he always did. We just looked at her with concerned looks on our faces and walked back to the car. On the way to Jim's house, we saw it again, but it was heading the opposite direction, to Sue's house. We thought it was either another one or the same one which had either gotten lost or visited someone else and was now going to Sue. Deciding that it was our duty as friends to Sue to try and protect her from whatever this thing was, we turned around. But when we did so, the creature reared up once again and looked at us. Then something I will never forget happened. It let loose a deep, guttural roar directed at us. A roar so bestial in nature that it shook us both to our cores. Apparently, we were not the only ones that were shaken, as my car's radio died and the engine shut off. I screamed at the top of my lungs, accompanied by Jim, and fumbled to turn it back on. By the time the creature was halfway to our car, it was walking into the road towards us. I got it back on in time to floor it out of there, as fast as possible. When I finally got slowed down enough to not break every speed limit in America, I realized I had passed Jim's house about 3 miles back. I didn't see the creature again that night, although I drove by Sue's house again and everything seemed fine. No broken windows or signs of forced entry, and I haven't seen anything like it since. I don't know what to call it other than a skinwalker, but whatever it was hostile, and it plagued either the local community or one of my friends specifically. I have kept in touch with both Jim and Sue. She refuses to talk about it, and will only say, "Things are fine," when I ask about it. Jim can't get anything out of her either. I'm afraid for her. I'm afraid for everyone in that area. Hi guys, glad to see you made it to the end of the video. Skinwalkers have always been something that both intrigue and terrify me. If you have any scary Skinwalker stories from your own life, feel free to send them to the email in the description. Alright guys, that just about wraps up the video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So long, Fear Seekers. I'll see you in the next video.